welcome to Utah. Sort of. You know, I wanted to make this video, this Utah video, to all my Christian brothers and sisters, or at least most of them. They keep telling me how bad it is in Utah. I'd like to tell you how good it is in God. I'm sorry. I don't get it. You know, I'm hearing this story, this report, this buzzword, this idea that's being promoted and being accepted by a lot of people that I think have been, no offense, deceived. You know, they're telling me that there's giants in the land. There's like, oh my God, it's so bad that you don't want to send anybody here. You want to make sure that they're mature Christians, that they can handle it, you know, that it's such a terrible place. I mean, you know who lives there. You know who. Yeah, you know. Or do you? You see, I keep getting told about spiritual warfare, you know, and kind of like, you know, spiritual oppression, you know, and like depression and obsession. It's almost like, you know, everybody's got a story about how bad it is instead of how good it is. Man, I'm thinking how good it is of God to give me a place to come and share His grace. Now, maybe I'm a little weird because I came from the Jesus movement, but I know a guy that was whacked out on acid. Hey, if you don't think he had demons, guess what? I remember a church that I had prayed that God would send someone at some point in time to this town that had a reputation of burying pastors. Now, the way they said it was that Klamath Falls, Oregon, was the place where pastors came and ended their ministry. The reason being is that the majority of those who had come before always had run off with their secretary, or somehow infidelity had constantly been one of those things that was popular in Klamath Falls, Oregon. As a matter of fact, it got so bad that they used to say that Klamath was the only town that you could shoot your wife and get away with it. I remember even the mayor in Klamath Falls saying about disabled people in the newspaper that handicapped and disabled people ought to go back in the closet where they belong. I remember personally being there before there ever was a Calvary Chapel, that most of the churches were teaching, quite frankly, topical studies that were interesting but never directive. It was always abstract, not really towards the object of the person of Jesus himself. I was a little frustrated by that. You know, people would talk about loving each other, and then they would literally go out and love each other. Now, there was a witches' coven, you know, and there was like animal sacrifices going on at old OIT. You know, there were things going on in the woods that people didn't talk about that I went out to go see about. And there were things that were really weird and really bizarre and even perverse and animistic and you name it. There was some really wacko stuff going on. Matter of fact, I met a Russian Christian Pentecostal who was called one of the leapers and dancers and leapers and shouters that had come over from Russia. His family had been there for a long time during the time when land was given away to the people in order to come to the area of Klamath Falls in Northern California to be farmers and to do those things. And his family had been there a long time, and they were a closed church, but they had these interesting things that they used to do, you know, that they used to talk about spiritually. Now, for most of us that are like, you know, maybe not so familiar with the things of the spirit or spiritual world or into other things, it's a little weird. It's a little bizarre. But you see, I had some cutting teeth on some real experiences that don't make much sense in some ways to some people that have never been there. Now, I appreciate somebody that shared with me recently, you know, about his ministry, and he'd gone over to Russia, and he'd been in places, and he'd cast out demons, you know, and seen different spiritual possessions, and he was shocked the first time that he couldn't cast out, you know, this demon that, you know, he'd run into, the situation. And Jesus talked about that, you know, except that with that prayer and fasting. But there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know, and Pigs in a Parlor isn't exactly a good book to be learning from. And while Peretti is a nice fiction writer, except the Lord really leads you, you know, you may be misled. So I find it interesting that here I come to this land that is just beautiful. It's gorgeous. It's like you look around and you see, wow, look at the prosperity. Look at the people. Look at the diversity. Look at the way things are growing. Look at the land itself. Look at the way things are being developed. And I think, man, surely God is in this place. I think this is a land flowing almost like with milk and honey. Man, it's so cool. It could be great. As a matter of fact, I think it says that it's elevated, and maybe it's self-elevated in one way, or maybe it's elevated in another way, and maybe we could be elevated in some way to enjoy this place we call Utah. But you see, when I came here, I kept running into my brothers and sisters, in the Lord, and they were all telling me how bad it was. And I kept going, Lord, is my discernment like whacked out? Am I all about? I mean, when I lived somewhere else and thought about coming here, oh, sure, I had my own misconceptions. I was raised around Mormons. I was raised working for Mormon families. Matter of fact, all my life, at some point in time, I've always been dealing with people that are part of that church and that religious system that obviously is not Christian, but they do a very good job of looking very religious, much like the Orthodox Jews do, much like a lot of legalistic type of religions do. They look really good. You scratch the surface and yeah, of course the skin bleeds, but you go a little deeper and, I found most people that live a very righteous lifestyle often have some kind of unrighteousness beneath the surface. And I found that true every place I went, wherever I dealt with those people and got personally involved with those that were involved in any type of religious righteousness like that. For instance, like in New York City, the rabbis having the rabbis good inside of Hasidism. You couldn't be in the community and get away with that. But of course, if it's a Gentile down the street, outside of where people were watching, until the rabbis were video recorded, hey, most people thought of, like rabbis as being, especially the Orthodox rabbis, being perfectly righteous and holy. Funny how people that are holy look like that until God reveals the truth. And I think that's what I found here in Utah. I see in just my own experience here in VidDevo and my own experience moving in, not so much spiritual oppression, but so much spiritual challenges. Development of the person and the patience that we need in order to be here long term. Because you see, it's easy to be a flash in the pan. It's easy to have expectations and have realizations. The expectation is you want to do some mega thing, and be a mega part and be all these other things that you've heard of everyone else doing. Some huge church or some huge effect, or you don't want to go to where, there's poor people. Because I went down the street, and I kind of went to the Latino side of Salt Lake City. I went to some of the other different cultural, ethnic little conclaves that are involved in this state we call Utah. I drove south towards Provo and I saw a different part of the state. I drove north towards Ogden and I saw different aspects of different people, personalities, and groups that I didn't hear my brothers and sisters talking about. They're always talking about one group, one problem, one social, really, event of types of people that they seem to have an issue with that really I have no problem at all. Hey, those that are healthy don't need a physician, but those that are, in need, those that are weak, those that are feeble, those that are hungry, those that are thirsty, can come and find water, can find food, can find shelter, can find Jesus minister to them. And I did see that on the streets. But you see, sometimes I think maybe we get a little too caught up in what we want to be about. We want to have fine clothes, look nice. We want to have a temple on every corner. Now, it may be our own temple or our own church or our own Calvary Chapel or our own ministry. But in some ways, that's more of a spiritual warfare of fighting myself than fighting something outside myself. Because I've been where places are spiritually oppressed. Oh, it's evil. Don't get me wrong. There are places like down in Louisiana, it's some tough stuff. There are places like in Oregon, oh, it's some rough stuff. There are places in Jerusalem where I say we know where Satan's seat sits, but literally, Rome may be quite close to being next to that. But the point is that in Jerusalem, there's even a syndrome called Jerusalem syndrome. That's where people get so spiritually messed up, they get caught up in the pressure or oppression of what's going on at the place that they lose their mind, so to speak. And mental health experts even talk about it. Even in Orthodox Judaism, they talk about spiritually being not possessed, but obsessed by something harassing them. Because once they're out of that environment, they're fine. Matter of fact, some of the hospitals even recommend shipping them out in order to get back to what they're all about, so they have their, so to speak, spiritual gyroscope put back in place, and they could be, their mental health comes restored back to them. Now, tourism doesn't hear much about that, but when you live in Israel, like I did, when you live in Jerusalem nonstop, like I did, there's a lot going on. And it's spiritual, and it's spiritual warfare. Now, spiritual warfare can occur anywhere, in any place, at any time. What your definition of spiritual warfare is, will determine usually whether you're accurate according to the Bible or not. I understand what some people are saying about, spiritual warfare, coming here in Utah, but I look at the sun shining right now, and I know that the weather's going to change. And so, because I know that, I'm prepared for that. I didn't come here with any, high in the sky ideas. I came here everywhere I've gone, I've met people. I've met humanity. I've met, different things going on with different peoples at different times, that they go through different situations and circumstances, that some of it may be involving some spiritual aspect of the reality of life being a tripartite existence, meaning that we have a soulful life, very emotionally based. We have a practical life, very physically based. But we also have a spiritual life, very unseen things of the spirit that go on in this world that some of us understand and know about. And some of us maybe don't know so much as we think we know, and we blame much of what is going on something else that might be not so much applied as it could be perceived, that God would give us revelation about how we are to deal with it. Me personally, since I've gotten here, it's been, a hassle, I guess you could say in a way, but nothing that's abnormal or unusual compared to what I've been through in other places, other times, that are far worse than anything I've seen so far or heard stories of from anyone at all. Boy, I could tell you some really strange spiritual experiences that nearly got me killed. And I know other missionaries the same way. I don't see it so bad. I've seen, already, some pastors that, maybe they're a little kind of off track. They're doing topicals, it's well, okay. Or maybe some other ones doing whatever. And, I think that, we can all be, led or misled, or we can all be kind of off track or on our own track, or, whatever, making our own kind of music. But what I see really is that if our foundation is sure, if our confidence is placed in God alone, and we don't trust in ourselves, but we trust in the Lord with all our heart, meaning not in our own understanding, but in all our ways acknowledging Him and Him directing our path, I don't see any problem here. Like I said, since I moved in, it's always been challenging. I may have had to do long-term things that used to take me short-term to accomplish. There may be some things like Daniel, where, Daniel prayed, and God sent the answer, and then the angel was harassed until he could bring the answer. That, we're told that the king of, I can't remember which king